Millionaire returns to his abandoned home, but shocked to see his dead wife alive with his daughter. He came to bury the last memory of her. He never expected her to open the door. What he did next made him discover the truth his own mother buried for years. Hello friends, welcome to today's story. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment, are you watching from Lagos, London, Houston or somewhere else? We love seeing where our family comes from. Philip James had not cried since the funeral. There had been no body to bury, just an empty casket, a mother's cold hand on his shoulder, and the smell of smoke that still found him in his sleep 7 years later. Now he sat in the back of his car, a brown leather briefcase balanced on his knee, the sale papers inside already signed in his mind. He was done. The James estate and everything it once meant would be rubble by spring. We've arrived, sir. He stepped out without looking up. The rusted gate, the blind windows, the garden that had given up growing. He told himself it was just land. Then the front door opened. A woman stood in the frame. Red dress, bare feet, a small child pressed against her chest, and eyes that Philip recognized like a wound reopening after years of careful healing. His eyes on that child. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the dirt. 7 years he had mourned her, he had believed the fire, he had trusted his mother. The woman's lips parted, barely a sound. Philip. The papers inside his briefcase meant nothing now. The alarm on Philip's phone went off at 5 a.m. It always did. Not because he needed the sleep, he rarely got any, but because silence at that hour had a weight to it he hadn't learned to carry without something cutting through it. He was already at his desk. The penthouse sat on the 47th floor of the Cole Tower, his building, his name on the glass, and from where he worked the city looked like something he owned. In a way he did. Philip James controlled the movement of cargo across 4 continents. Shipping routes, freight contracts, port acquisitions, the language of his days was numbers and logistics, and he had made himself fluent in it, the way a man learns a new language after losing his mother tongue. He had not always been like this. There were photographs somewhere in storage of a younger Philip, laughing, sleeves rolled up, grass-stained shoes. A woman beside him with her head thrown back mid-sentence, caught forever in the middle of saying something that must have been wonderful. He had boxed those photographs 7 years ago, and told his assistant never to unpack them. His phone lit up. Marcus, his head of acquisitions, had sent the final summary for the James estate deal. The luxury hotel group had made their offer twice already. This time Philip had said yes. The estate had sat untouched for 7 years, gates rusting, rooms gathering silence, the garden dying in slow motion. He paid a maintenance fee every quarter out of habit or guilt, or something in between that he had stopped trying to name. It was time to let it go. He told himself it was a practical decision. The land was valuable. The structure was deteriorating. Holding on to it served no financial purpose, and he was, above all else, a practical man. He did not tell himself the other thing, that every quarter when the maintenance invoice arrived, he sat for exactly 3 minutes doing nothing. No calls, no emails, just sitting, and then he moved on. His driver picked him up at 7. Briefcase, blue suit, the knot of his tie precise as always. His assistant had offered to send a junior partner to handle the signing. Philip had declined without explaining why. Some things a man had to do himself. He watched the city give way to quieter roads, wider skis, the kind of landscape that remembered things cities were designed to forget. His jaw tightened. He opened the briefcase, checked the papers, closed it again. By the time the car passed through the old county road that led to the estate, Philip had convinced himself completely. This was closure, clean, final, necessary. He was not a man running from grief. He was a man making a decision. He almost believed it. The estate looked worse in person. Philip had seen the maintenance reports. Peeling paint, structural settling, water damage along the east wing. Numbers on a page. But standing here, watching the sedan pull away behind him, he felt the difference between reading about decay and standing inside it. The garden was unrecognizable. What Eunice had once kept alive with early mornings and muddy hands was now a tangle of brown stems and surrender. The porch railing leaned at an angle that suggested it had given up arguing with gravity. Above the front door, a crack ran through the old stone lintel like a fault line, slow, patient damage, the kind that came from years of no one caring enough to stop it. Philip set his jaw and walked toward the entrance. The sale papers were in his briefcase. The hotel group's representative would arrive within the hour. 45 minutes, he had told himself in the car. He would be back on the road before the memory of this place could settle into his chest and stay there. He was 10 feet from the door when it opened. He stopped. A woman stepped into the frame. She was wearing a simple red dress, practical and plain, the kind chosen for durability rather than anything else. Her feet were bare against the worn wooden threshold. She was holding a child, a small girl, maybe 6 years old, pressed close against her side with the ease of 1,000 repetitions, the way children mold themselves to the people they trust most. Philip's mind did what trained, disciplined minds do when faced with the impossible. It rejected it. His eyes were lying. The light was strange out here. It had been 7 years and grief did things to memory, softened edges, sharpened longing, manufactured what the heart refused to release. This was not her. Except the way she stood. The slight tilt of her chin when she was uncertain but holding her ground. He had seen that exact posture 100 times, at dinner tables and doorways, and quiet arguments that always ended with her winning, because she was almost always right. His briefcase slipped. He didn't hear it hit the dirt. He didn't hear anything. The world had reduced itself to the woman in the doorway and the child in her arms, and then the child turned her face toward him, and Philip felt something inside his chest crack open like the fault line above the door. The girl had his eyes. Not similar, not reminiscent. His, the exact color, the exact shape, the slight heaviness at the outer corners that his own mother had once called the James look. He took one step forward, then stopped. The woman's lips parted. Her voice came out careful and trembling. The way you speak a name you've been forbidden to say for years. Philip. He couldn't answer, he couldn't move. He had signed papers for a demolition. He had not prepared for a resurrection. Nobody moved. The three of them held the moment like it was made of glass. One wrong breath, and it would shatter into something none of them could put back together. It was Ella who broke it. She turned her face fully toward Philip, studying him the way children study strangers. Openly, without apology, with the kind of fearless curiosity that adults spend their whole lives learning to hide. Her eyes moved from his shoes to his briefcase to his face, and then they stayed there. Mama, she said quietly without looking away from him, that man is crying. Philip raised his hand to his face. His fingers came back wet. He hadn't noticed. He couldn't remember the last time he hadn't noticed. Eunice tightened her arm around the girl but said nothing. She was watching Philip the way you watch something fragile that has been thrown into the air, waiting to see whether it would land or shatter. Philip crouched down slowly, the way you move around something you don't want to frighten. He set the briefcase in the dirt beside him. At eye level, the girl was even more disarming, her gaze steady and unblinking, her expression carrying that particular seriousness that belongs only to children who have grown up in quiet houses, listening to more than they are told. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice came out lower than he intended. She considered him for a moment, as if weighing whether he deserved the answer. "Ella," she said, "Ella James." The name hit him somewhere behind the sternum. He hadn't given her that name. He hadn't been there to give her anything. And yet here it was, his name, living and breathing and watching him with his own eyes from a face he had never seen before today. "How old are you, Ella?" "6, she said. Then, with the careful precision of a child who takes accuracy seriously, 6.5. 6.5 years. He had been sitting at a desk on the 47th floor, signing contracts and reviewing freight routes, while this child had been learning to walk, learning to talk, learning her own name in a house he had been paying to slowly fall apart. He looked up at Eunice. She had not moved from the doorway. Her eyes were glassy, but her chin was still lifted, that same posture, that same quiet defiance that he now understood, had kept her alive through things he didn't yet know. He looked back at Ella. She reached out and touched the lapel of his suit jacket once with 2 fingers, the gesture of a child testing whether something is real. "You look like me," she said simply. Philip James, who had built an empire on the discipline of feeling nothing, closed his eyes. His heart, which had been a hollow and carefully managed thing for 7 years, woke up. Eunice made tea. It seemed like an impossible thing to do, to walk back into that small kitchen, fill a kettle, set 2 cups on a table with a crack running down its middle, but she did it, and Philip understood that she needed the ritual of it. Something ordinary to hold onto while she said the extraordinary. Ella sat on the floor nearby, arranging stones she had collected into a pattern only she understood, occasionally glancing up at Philip with those eyes that still undid him every time. Eunice set the cup in front of him and sat down. She wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked at the table for a long moment. Then she began. She had gone into labour 6 weeks early. Philip had been in Singapore closing a port deal. She hadn't wanted to worry him, told herself it was routine, that she would call once the baby arrived and everything was fine. She never got the chance. Victoria had arrived at the hospital before the baby did. Philip went still. Eunice's voice stayed level, the way voices do when a story has been carried so long it has worn smooth. Victoria had come alone, no driver, no assistant, which should have told Eunice everything. She sat beside the hospital bed and spoke quietly, almost gently, the way you speak to someone you have already decided to destroy. She told Eunice that she had never been good enough, that Philip's future required a certain kind of woman, a name, a family, connections that Eunice's background could never provide, that the baby, if it survived, would be raised in the same poverty Eunice came from, that she had already spoken to people, doctors, administrators, officials, people who owed her favours and knew how to make problems disappear quietly. She gave Eunice a choice. Disappear willingly, and the child would be safe and raised with resources Eunice could never provide. Refuse and Victoria would have her declared mentally unstable. The baby would be taken. Eunice would spend years fighting a system that Victoria owned. She said it the way you read a weather report, Eunice said quietly. Like the outcome was already settled and she was just informing me. 2 days later, there was a controlled fire in a disused storage wing of the hospital. No patients harmed. Victoria's people made sure the paperwork told a different story, one involving a young woman who hadn't survived complications, a body too damaged to recover, a grieving husband who needed to be protected from details. Philip had not asked a single question. That was the part Eunice didn't say out loud, but it sat between them on the cracked table, visible anyway. Philip stared at his untouched tea. The steam had gone out of it. From the floor, Ella hummed quietly to herself, arranging her stones into something that looked, from where he sat, almost like a house. Philip asked the question that had been sitting in his throat since the doorway. Why here? Eunice looked at him over the rim of her cup, because it was the last place she would look. It made a terrible kind of sense. Victoria had spent years making clear that the estate was beneath the James name, too rural, too modest, an embarrassment from Philip's father's generation that should have been sold off long ago. She had never visited, never sent anyone to visit. In Victoria's mind, the property was already gone. Which made it, Eunice had understood from the moment she fled the hospital with a newborn and nothing else, the safest place in the world. She had arrived in winter. The pipes had frozen and 2 windows along the east wing had given in to the wind. She had no money, no phone, no name she could safely use. She had a 6-day-old baby wrapped in a hospital blanket and the kind of desperation that sharpens a person down to pure instinct. She learned quickly. The town nearby was small enough that strangers were noticed, but large enough that a quiet woman asking for day work was not unusual. She cleaned houses. She mended clothes. She grew what she could in the back garden where the soil was still good. Away from the visible decay at the front. She gave her name as Eunice Adara, her mother's maiden name, and she kept her head down and she kept Ella close and she kept surviving, one season at a time. And every quarter, without fail, money arrived. Philip's maintenance payments, autopilot transfers from an account he never reviewed, kept the electricity connected and the roof from failing entirely. He had been funding her survival without knowing it, paying to preserve the memory of a life his mother had told him was gone. I thought about stopping it, Eunice said, redirecting it somehow, sending it back, but the truth is, she paused, it kept Ella warm. I told myself I would find a way to pay it back. I still intend to. Philip opened his mouth and closed it again. Ella had fallen asleep on the floor, her head resting on her arm, her collection of stones still arranged carefully around her. In sleep she looked younger, the seriousness gone from her face, replaced by something unguarded and soft. She doesn't know, Philip asked quietly. She knows her father didn't know about her, Eunice said. I refused to let her grow up believing she was unwanted. That was the one thing I would not give Victoria. The room was quiet except for the sound of Ella breathing and the old house settling around them. Philip looked at his daughter, sleeping on the floor of the home he had come to demolish. He thought about the hotel group's representative, due to arrive in 20 minutes. He reached into his briefcase and turned his phone face down. The black car came up the road 40 minutes later. It was not the hotel representative. Philip recognized the vehicle before it stopped, the long, dark body, the tinted glass, the particular unhurried speed of someone who had never needed to rush because the world had always waited for her. His stomach turned in a way it hadn't since childhood. Victoria James stepped out with the composure of a woman arriving at a function held in her honor. She was dressed in grey, as she always was, a color she wore like armor. Her hair was set. Her posture was a statement. She surveyed the estate with the mild displeasure of someone inspecting something that had failed to meet expectations, which was, Philip understood now, how she looked at most things. How she had always looked at Eunice. She didn't acknowledge him first. Her eyes found Eunice in the doorway, Eunice who had not retreated, who was standing exactly where she had been standing when Philip arrived, chin lifted, one hand resting on the door frame, and something passed across Victoria's face. Not surprise, calculation. "I see," Victoria said, as though confirming a suspicion she had long prepared for. "Mother," Philip's voice came out flat. She turned to him then, and her expression shifted into something that resembled warmth, the way a painting resembles a living face. "Philip, I heard you were coming today. I thought I would save you the trouble of dealing with this alone." "Dealing with what?" With her, the word was delivered cleanly, without heat. That was always Victoria's way. The coldest weapons were the quietest ones. She looked back at Eunice. "You've had your time here. Whatever you hope to accomplish by being here today, it ends now. I'll have someone send you whatever reasonable sum makes this simple and clean, but you will not do this to my son." Eunice said nothing. She didn't move. "She's his wife," Philip said. "She is a woman who has been living illegally on James' property for 7 years, Victoria replied, turning to him with the patient tone of someone correcting a misunderstanding. "Whatever she has told you in the last hour, Philip, you need to consider the source. Grief does things to people. It makes them. She told me about the hospital." The sentence landed like a door slamming. For the first time, something flickered behind Victoria's eyes. She recovered in under a second. She had always been fast, but Philip had seen it. He had spent 37 years learning to read a room. He had simply never thought to read his mother. "You should be careful," Victoria said quietly, "about the stories you choose to believe." From inside the house came the soft sound of Ella stirring awake. Victoria's eyes moved toward the sound, then back to Philip. And in that look, he saw everything Eunice had told him confirmed without a single word. Victoria made the call from the front path. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. Philip watched her speak into her phone with the measured calm of someone placing a lunch reservation, a few quiet sentences, a pause to listen, a small nod. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her coat pocket and turned back to them as though the conversation had been entirely unremarkable. "You called the police," Philip said. "I called for assistance," Victoria replied. "There is a woman who has been occupying this property without authorization. There is a child whose welfare needs to be assessed by the appropriate people. I am simply making sure the right steps are followed." "She is my wife." "She is legally dead." Victoria's voice didn't waver. "The documentation was filed 7 years ago. Whatever she is to you emotionally, Philip, in the eyes of every relevant institution, she does not exist. And a child being raised in an abandoned building by a woman with no legal identity, she let the implication settle, that is a welfare concern. Anyone would say so." Philip turned to Eunice. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were steady. She had known this was possible. He could see that. She had been living with this particular fear for 6.5 years, the fear that the door would open and everything she had built in silence would be taken in an afternoon. Ella appeared at Eunice's side, pressing close, reading the room the way children do when adults forget they are present. Philip heard the car before he saw it, then another behind it. A patrol vehicle and a second unmarked car coming up the estate road, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had been briefed before they arrived. He crossed the porch in 4 steps and stood in the doorway. Not beside Eunice, in front of her. The officers stepped out and approached with the careful, neutral expressions of people trying to make a difficult thing look routine. The man in plain clothes behind them, Philip recognized as a social services coordinator. He had seen that lanyard, that clipboard, at a charity board meeting 2 years ago. "Mr. James," the coordinator began, "we've received a report." "This is my home," Philip said. "This is my wife, that is my daughter. Nobody is going inside and nobody is being removed." "Sir, we have a duty to—" "I understand your duty." Philip reached into his jacket and produced a business card, the kind that opened doors without explanation. "I also have a legal team that can be here in 40 minutes. I'd suggest we wait for them before anyone makes a decision they can't undo." A silence moved through the assembled group. Victoria stood at the edge of it, watching her son block the doorway of the house she had dismissed for years, protecting the family she had erased. Behind him, Philip felt Ella's small hand find the back of his jacket and hold on. He didn't move an inch. The legal team arrived in 38 minutes. Philip had counted. Old habit, he measured everything against deadlines, against the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. 3 attorneys in a second black car, suits still settling on their shoulders from the speed of departure. He had called Marcus first, then the firm's senior partner, then his personal attorney in that order, speaking in the clipped sentences of a man who had spent years making large problems move quickly. The officers stepped back. The social services coordinator exchanged quiet words with Philip's lead attorney, consulted his clipboard twice, and then retreated to his vehicle. Victoria watched from the path, her expression unreadable, her posture unchanged, but she did not leave. She was waiting, Philip understood, to see whether this was theatre or something with actual teeth. He intended to show her. He sent Eunice and Ella inside with 2 words, "Stay warm," and then he sat on the porch steps with his briefcase across his knees, and opened it for the first time since it had hit the dirt. The sale papers were still there, crisp, tabbed, waiting for signatures that would erase everything. He set them aside without looking at them. Beneath them was a separate folder, older, the edges soft with handling. He had pulled it from his office archive 3 weeks ago when the estate sale was first confirmed, intending to review the original property documents before signing. He had never opened it. He did now. It took him 11 minutes. The property archive contained 7 years of maintenance invoices, utility transfers and quarterly payments, a paper record of a life preserved on autopilot. But folded inside the original estate documentation, filed by his father's solicitor decades ago and never removed, were the hospital records from the night of the fire. Not the official report, the financial records. A donation of considerable size, made to the hospital's administrative fund on the night in question, issued from a private account Philip recognized immediately. He had seen that account number on his mother's charitable foundation statements every year at the annual board review. He had signed off on those statements himself. Beneath that, a second transfer, smaller, more discreet, to a private records management firm that Philip had never heard of but whose registered director, when he searched the name on his phone, shared a surname with the hospital administrator who had signed Eunice's death certificate. He sat with the papers in his hands and the morning light coming sideways across the porch. It was all there. It had always been there, archived and patient, waiting for someone to look. He closed the folder carefully. He looked up at his mother, still standing on the path, still waiting. Victoria read his face. For the first time since she had arrived, her composure shifted, not dramatically, not completely, but enough. A hairline fracture in the grey. Philip stood up slowly and picked up his phone. It took 4 days to unravel 7 years. Philip's attorneys filed the first documents by evening. The financial records went to 2 journalists he trusted, not for spectacle but for insurance. Victoria's people moved quickly when threatened, and the best defense against a quiet burial was to make the story too visible to disappear. By the 2nd day, the hospital administrator had retained his own lawyer. By the 3rd, the private records firm had stopped answering Victoria's calls. Victoria herself said very little throughout. She had spent a lifetime building walls from composure, and she retreated behind them now with the dignity of someone who refused to acknowledge the walls were falling. She made no apology. Philip had not expected one. He knew his mother well enough to understand that in her architecture of the world, she had done nothing wrong. She had simply managed a situation the way situations required managing. He told her on the 4th morning, in the same quiet tone she had always used on him, that she was no longer welcome in his life until she could account for what she had done. Not to him, to Eunice, to Ella, to the 6.5 years that could not be recovered. She left without a scene, that at least was honest. On the 5th day, Philip called the hotel group and cancelled the sale. The representative was professionally unhappy. Philip listened to the objections with the patience of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the other person to finish. He refunded the deposit from his personal account, ended the call, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the estate kitchen, where Eunice was teaching Ella the names of the herbs she had grown in the back garden. He watched them through the window. Ella was frowning with concentration, repeating the names back carefully, getting 2 out of 3 right and demanding to be corrected on the 3rd. Eunice was laughing, a sound Philip had spent 7 years forgetting and was now discovering he had never actually forgotten at all. He walked outside. The morning was cool and the garden, which had looked like pure surrender 5 days ago, already looked different to him, not changed, but seen correctly for the first time. The structure was still there beneath the overgrowth. It had simply been waiting for someone to stop walking away from it. He stood beside Eunice, and she looked at him sideways, the way she always had when she was reading him without asking. He reached up and loosened his tie. Then he pulled it free entirely and folded it over the porch railing. Ella looked at it, then at him. "Are you staying?" she asked. "Yes," Philip said. She considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Then she held out a small green sprig. "Then you have to learn the herbs too," she said. Philip crouched down and held out his hand. He was ready to start over.